He thought the elephant was just standing still. Looking through the binoculars, he was horrified. The elephant emergency, a race against time, through his binoculars. He saw something that made his blood run cold. David Morgan had been watching elephants in the African savanna for over 20 years. He thought he'd seen everything, but what he spotted that morning, standing perfectly still near a watering hole, made him grab his radio immediately. Something was terribly wrong with the young elephant in his view, and if help didn't arrive soon, it would be too late. Let me take you back to how this all started. It was early morning in Kruger National Park, South Africa. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. David, a wildlife photographer and conservationist, had arrived at his usual spot before dawn. He loved these quiet hours when the animals were most active, moving through the grasslands in search of food and water. He set up his camera equipment and pulled out his binoculars, scanning the landscape. A herd of elephants was making their way toward the watering hole about half a mile away. David smiled. Elephants were always his favorite subjects. Their intelligence, their family bonds, their gentle nature despite their massive size, everything about them fascinated him. As he watched, he counted the herd. 12 adults and several younger elephants, including a few babies staying close to their mothers. The group moved slowly, stopping occasionally to pull up grass or strip bark from trees. Everything seemed normal. But then David noticed something odd. One of the younger elephants, maybe 3 or 4 years old, had stopped walking. While the rest of the herd continued toward the water, this little one stood completely still. At first, David thought the elephant was just resting or maybe distracted by something. Young elephants could be curious and playful, often wandering off to investigate interesting smells or sounds. David kept watching. Minutes passed. The elephant still hadn't moved. The rest of the herd was now at the watering hole, drinking and splashing, but this young one remained behind, isolated and motionless. Something about the posture seemed wrong. The elephant's head was lowered and its body looked tense. David adjusted his binoculars, zooming in for a closer look. What he saw made his heart sink. There was something protruding from the elephant's rear end. Something pink and swollen that definitely shouldn't be there. David had seen enough wildlife injuries and illnesses to recognize a serious medical problem when he saw one. This wasn't a minor issue. This was a life-threatening emergency. The young elephant was suffering from what's called a rectal prolapse. It's a condition where part of the intestine pushes out through the rectum, usually caused by severe digestive problems, parasites, or extreme straining. In the wild, this condition is incredibly dangerous. The exposed tissue can become infected quickly in the heat and dust. Predators can smell the blood and weakness, and the elephant itself is in tremendous pain, unable to move properly or defend itself. David's mind raced. The elephant was standing alone, separated from the protective circle of its family. It was vulnerable. Every minute that passed increased the risk of infection, blood loss, or predator attack. Lions and hyenas patrolled these areas constantly, always looking for weak or injured animals. He grabbed his satellite phone and immediately called the local wildlife rescue organization. His hands were shaking as he explained what he was seeing and gave them the exact coordinates. The woman on the other end of the line listened carefully, asking questions about the elephant's size, behavior, and the severity of the prolapse. "We're sending a team right now," she said. "They'll be there in 45 minutes. Can you stay and keep watch?" "I'm not going anywhere," David replied. Those 45 minutes felt like hours. David kept his binoculars trained on the young elephant, documenting everything with his camera. The elephant shifted its weight occasionally but didn't try to walk. At one point it let out a low rumble, a distress call. David could see the mother elephant at the watering hole lift her head, listening. She took a few steps toward her baby but seemed uncertain. Torn between staying with the herd and helping her calf, elephant herds are incredibly protective of their young, but they also have an instinct to keep moving, to find food and water for the entire group. Sometimes, tragically, a sick or injured member gets left behind because the survival of the many outweighs the needs of the one. David prayed that wouldn't happen here. Finally, he heard the sound of vehicles approaching. 2 safari trucks came bouncing across the rough terrain, carrying the rescue team. There were 4 people, 2 veterinarians and 2 wildlife rangers, along with all the medical equipment they'd need. David waved them over and quickly briefed them on the situation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the lead veterinarian, looked through the binoculars and nodded grimly. "We need to act fast. That prolapse has been exposed for hours, maybe longer. Infection risk is extremely high." The team moved with practiced efficiency. They couldn't just walk up to the elephant. Despite being young and injured, it was still a wild animal that could be dangerous if frightened. They needed to tranquilize it first. Dr. Mitchell loaded a dart gun with a carefully measured dose of sedative, calculated based on the elephant's estimated weight. The hardest part was getting close enough for a clean shot without spooking the animal or attracting the attention of the protective herd. 2 rangers slowly drove one of the vehicles in a wide arc, positioning themselves between the young elephant and the rest of the group. Dr. Mitchell approached from the opposite side. Moving quietly on foot, David watched through his camera lens, barely breathing. This was the critical moment. Dr. Mitchell raised the dart gun, aimed carefully, and fired. The dart hit the elephant's shoulder with a soft thump. The elephant flinched and turned its head, confused. For a moment, David worried it might try to run, which could make the prolapse worse. But the animal just stood there, swaying slightly as the sedative began to take effect. 3 minutes later, the elephant's legs started to buckle. The team rushed forward, guiding it down gently so it wouldn't fall on the injured area. Within moments, the massive animal was lying on its side, breathing deeply but unconscious. Now, the real work began. Dr. Mitchell and her colleague, Dr. James Chen, immediately began examining the prolapse. It was worse than they'd feared. The exposed tissue was dry, covered in dust and debris, and showing early signs of infection. They would need to clean it thoroughly, reduce the swelling, and carefully push the intestine back inside where it belonged. Working in the field is nothing like working in a sterile operating room. There was dirt, flies, and intense heat, but these veterinarians were experienced in bush medicine. They set up a portable shade structure over the elephant and got to work. First, they irrigated the prolapse with sterile saline solution, washing away the dirt and checking for any tears or damaged tissue. Then they applied an antibiotic gel to fight infection and a special solution to reduce the swelling. The most delicate part came next, manually pushing the prolapse back into place. This required patience, skill, and gentle pressure. Filming everything. This was important documentation that could help other rescue teams in the future. He'd seen many wildlife rescues over the years, but this one felt particularly tense. Everything had to go perfectly. After 30 minutes of careful work, Dr. Mitchell stepped back and wiped the sweat from her forehead. "It's back in place," she announced. "Now we need to stitch and make sure it stays there." They placed several sutures to reinforce the area and prevent the prolapse from happening again. The elephant was also given a strong dose of antibiotics, anti-inflammatory medication, and a drug to help regulate its digestive system and prevent straining. The entire procedure took just over an hour. When they were finished, the team stepped back to wait for the sedative to wear off. They'd administered a reversal drug to speed up the process, and within 15 minutes the young elephant began to stir. Its eyes opened. Its trunk moved. Slowly, carefully, it rolled onto its stomach and then pushed itself up onto its feet. The elephant stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, getting its bearings. Then it took a tentative step. Then another. At the watering hole, the mother elephant trumpeted loudly. She'd been watching the whole time, pacing nervously. Now she began walking toward her baby, moving faster with each step. The young elephant heard its mother's call and started walking too, moving stiffly but steadily in her direction. When they met, the mother wrapped her trunk around her baby, touching and smelling it, making sure it was okay. The young elephant leaned into its mother's side, seeking comfort and reassurance. Within moments, the rest of the herd came over, surrounding the pair in a protective circle. Dr. Mitchell smiled, tears in her eyes. "That's what we do this for," she said quietly. The rescue team packed up their equipment and drove away, leaving the herd in peace. David stayed a bit longer, watching as the elephants gradually relaxed and returned to their normal routine. The young elephant stayed close to its mother, but it was eating and moving without visible distress. Over the next several weeks, David returned to the area regularly to check on the herd. Each time, he was relieved to see the young elephant thriving. The veterinary team had done follow-up observations too, and all signs indicated a complete recovery. The stitches had dissolved naturally, and there was no recurrence of the prolapse. This story could have ended very differently. If David hadn't been there with his binoculars that morning, if he hadn't recognized the emergency and called for help, that young elephant would likely have died within days. Instead, because of the dedication of wildlife conservationists, skilled veterinarians, and one observant photographer, a life was saved. It's a reminder that wildlife conservation isn't just about protecting habitats and fighting poachers. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time, noticing when something is wrong, and having the courage and resources to act. Every animal matters, and every life saved is a victory worth celebrating.